Do you feel like as a Christian, you are not really supposed to be having fun? Welcome to the Parable Podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and I always like to have fun. But today I'd love to share with you one of my recent messages from our home church in a series that we were walking through called Summer School, Relearning What Matters Most. Please enjoy this message wherever it may find you today. Well, before Eric and I had kids, we went out to this church service for his niece, and the church service ended. We all, family and friends, headed out to the lobby. It was a huge lobby, wide open hallways. And I don't know, we were talking about something, and we started laughing, and this woman walked past us, and she's like, shh, like, there's no laughing in church. And I'm like, oh, okay. I was like really taken aback, and I wondered, I'm like, did I miss something? I could understand if we were like in the church service and I was like laughing my head off, like that's wrong. But in this summer school series, we're learning relearning the truths and untangling the misunderstanding that we've been living with. So just like that woman, are we believing the misunderstanding that holiness means strict rules and avoiding fun? When you start living with that kind of misunderstanding, there becomes an issue with communication, causes conflict, or it's just plain confusing. That day I wondered, did I miss the memo about if you love Jesus, does that mean that you're not allowed to have fun? So where did that come from? For those of us, or people that you know maybe, that just really don't want anything to do with Jesus, it's usually because they don't want to be told that they have rules to live by. Why is it so restrictive of who I am? Don't try to control me. For some, the church feels like a place that constantly reminds you about guilt and shame, and that really doesn't sound like a fun hang. Sin equals punishment. So if I'm going to follow Jesus, it means fun must be definitely out of the equation. A lot of people, they get hung up on the 10 Commandments. And in the Old Testament, there were tons of rules too about eating and things you could drink and what to wear and what not to do. And while we don't follow the majority of those anymore, I can see how that has translated over time into, the people who love Jesus, they're just being forced to live by this strict set of rules, and their fun is being stifled at best. But what if God does have a reason? What if God does have a better plan? What if we relearn this truth that holiness is meaning living in God's character, which definitely includes joy and fun? So how do we understand this truth? When you take a hard look at your life, your thoughts, how you follow rules, you can kind of say, is this holy? The pages of the Bible represent all facets of God's character and his goodness. Everything that is of God is holy. So if we are God's creation, then we too are holy. And holiness simply means living in alignment with God's character. And I'm sure each of us have had many times in our life when things get misaligned. One of the times for me was our son, who's in 7th grade. He went to kindergarten for it was 3 days into kindergarten. He got off the bus and his arm was just hanging limp, and he was sobbing, crying. And I'm like, who hurt my child? Okay. That's why we should never send kids to school. Anyways, I figured it out. I'm like, okay, something is wrong here. And we went to the doctor. We went to urgent care. They did an x-ray, and something that they should have told parents from early on, from 0 to 5, the kids' elbow bone and their ligaments can move. Okay. That sounds great. And so they're just we just have to do this simple procedure, just a quick twist, and we're going to move it right back into place, and he's going to be just fine. Well, Reed is smart enough to be you just told me what you're going to do, and it doesn't feel good. So no, thank you. And she tried it 2 different times. And I'm she's I think I got it. And I'm I don't think so. But she's why don't you just go home, see how it is. If you need to, go back to an orthopedic doctor. I could tell later on that night, things weren't really progressing because she never really got it. And so I did what any good parent would do. I went onto Google and I went on to follow many YouTube videos about how you can fix what is called a nursemaid's elbow. It seemed like a simple procedure, and I said, Eric, this is what I'm going to do while Reed's asleep. I want to wait for him to just be in full REM cycle, and I'm just going to twist his arm, just pop it back into place, and it's going to be done. He's like, Danielle, I don't think that's a really good idea. And I said, do you want to hold him down tomorrow? And he's like, no. And so he's waiting out in the hallway. I get over to Reed's bed, I get everything in place, and it's literally just simple twist and pop back into place. He's in full sleep. I do it. He shoots out of bed. He's like, ah! And then he goes right back to bed. I did it. God knows that we are not always going to be able to fix it and live in alignment. We need His holiness. So we just need to look at the Bible and realize all the people, they tried to be holy and to see how that worked out, right? They tried to do it all by themselves. And so just think of why rules were created. If you don't want a young child to touch a hot stove or put their finger in an electrical outlet, it's because you love them, you care about them, right? God's rules came out of a place of love and desire for His people to find alignment in His holiness with Him. And so that's why God went to Moses when the Israelites were literally acting a fool, and they're like, hey, I think we need a couple commandments just to kind of set us in alignment, because it was just not working. God, in His goodness, loves us enough that He desires for us to be holy as well. But in our humanness of trying to be a good Christian and follow these rules, the results can be misguided. If we put such an emphasis on rules, then it becomes the end-all, be-all. Fun is removed, and people are just trying to tell you what to do. The focus and priority suddenly shifts over time, and it's now following rules over just embodying God's holiness first and foremost. So what is holiness? It's not merely just the rules we follow, but it's what we absorb, how we live our lives in God's presence. I love this footnote in my Bible. It said the Hebraic concept of holiness is set apart. Grace has embedded holiness into our life. Yet, we still have the option to make right choices and to yield what God wants us to do. And so that's why Peter, he wrote this in 1 Peter chapter 1, 15 through 16. As God's obedient children, never again shape your lives by the desires that you followed when you didn't know better. Instead, shape your lives to become like the Holy One who called you. For Scripture says, you are to be holy because I am holy. God sets us apart and provides us free will to shape our lives to become like Him and all that holiness represents. Attributes like wholeness and goodness, joy, and fun. And that is just some of the fruit of living in alignment with God. Now, I'm sure you're saying okay, I'm sure this is all well and good, but what about when life really sucks and everything is falling apart? What about suffering and injustice and anything on the newsfeed that just makes your heart absolutely sick? This passage was written to a group of Christians that were exiled. They were persecuted and forced to leave their homes because of their faith. But even in the sorrow that they were feeling, Paul reminded them of a hope that will never fade. Plus, a part of his message was taken out of Leviticus, where God was actually talking to those Israelites, and they were also exiled as well. If you're walking through a difficult season, I don't want to negate or diminish your pain in any way, but I do think it's possible that we can still hold the tension of hardship and fun at the same time. I recently had a conversation with a friend, and she was sharing about something silly that she had done, and then some crappy stuff happened to her, and she's like, oh my gosh, did I, because I did so much fun, Did I step out of God's holiness? And am I now being punished? I'm sure we've all wondered that, right? But if we look at that verse again, it says, you are to be holy, for I am holy. God is already holy. He chose to sacrifice his life for us so that we can be filled with his holiness. And he's not petty, where he's just like, I don't know. We're just going to take a little bit of holiness away from you today, just because of one action. He's not like that. Or maybe you're a person who just enjoys living in the joy through life. You don't have to be in shame or hide that part of you. The truth is, holiness means living in God's character, which definitely includes joy and fun. So I'd love to share this practice with you. If you're able, please stand. I know, I gotta get up. Welcome to service. Okay, everyone's gonna stand up and you're just gonna follow along what I did. This is like a practice that has gone through generations, it brings joy to people's life. Lucas, if you can. Here we go. Okay, 50s. You guys remember this one? Just like John Travolta. 90s kids. Okay, this is your last chance. I know you all know this. 70s. You in back over there, Jesse. I see you. Okay. Okay. You may take a seat, okay? I won't ask you to get up again. My question for you is, while you can find that on any reception dance floor, people are having a good time, how did that feel for you, right? Some of you are like, this was awesome. But some of you are like, Danielle, that is super cringe. Okay, that was weird. This was a little dorky. I felt super uncomfortable. And I know what you think. This is like too silly for church. This was embarrassing. Or maybe like, I'm just too old for this, right? Joy is natural to my personality, and I know that's not everyone's inclination. But if we are holy because of God's character, I want to be living fully embodied in all aspects of that daily, and that means celebrating fun. So how do we lose fun? How can we live with it? And how can we share joy with the world? Have you ever walked around your house and you're looking for your sunglasses and your keys, all to realize they've been on your head the whole time? The keys are in your hand, right? One of my favorite authors who celebrates joy unabashedly is Bob Goff, and he says, if you lose your joy, you have to ask yourself, where did I last have it? It seems simple enough, but we really have to dig into where we lost our sense of fun. Once I graduated college, I thought, okay, like now I have to be professional. Maybe I gotta tamp down the joy a little bit because I'm an adult now and I need to be taken seriously. And I remember coming to Westridge and I was greeting my sister-in-law in the lobby and service had already started, so nobody was really out there. And I kind of just like did this like, silliness. And one other person was there like, oh, I didn't know you were that silly. And I'm like, oh. I didn't recognize that I had been limiting my personality because of whatever environment that I had been a part of. And now you can't really get me to stop, right? There we go. Dr. Zap in the flesh. But when you end a hobby, or maybe you stop an instrument, or you stop exercising, you lose it, right? And you naturally forget to incorporate it back into your life. So when was the last time you had joy? There can be a couple of reasons of why you may have lost the fun and started unknowingly living this misunderstanding. The first, I'm sure some of you felt it, was embarrassment, right? By the age of 2, our cognitive capability for mortification begins. I was for sure thinking this was like 13. No. As a toddler, we are already self-conscious of the people around us, and watching to see how others respond. Are they responding negatively? Are they wondering, is this person really awkward, right? When was the last time that maybe somebody made you feel ashamed for having fun or bringing joy into that day, and it stuck with you? The second is if you struggle with perfection. You desperately want to be that good boy or that good girl, and you are told that you need to follow the rules and that there is no room for mistakes because that kind of silliness is not acceptable in church. What would other people think? But Jesus, he lived a perfect life. And on your behalf, he gives you his righteousness and holiness. And he doesn't require perfection from any of us. Or maybe you just had to grow up really, really young. You had so much put on you. Things that no child should ever had to been put on their shoulders. And because of that, you had no one to model what fun was, and it was stunted really, really early. There can be plenty of reasons of why fun and silliness were chipped out of your life little by little. And if you're feeling like and wondering, gosh, can I even get this back? There's good news. In 2 Corinthians 5:17, it says, anyone is united with the anointed one. The person is a new creation. The old life is gone, and see, a new life has begun. Every day, we have an opportunity to strip off that old way of thinking of embarrassment and perfection and carrying this weight of the past. We get to choose holiness as we are becoming this new creation over and over again. Holiness means that we get to live in God's character, which definitely includes joy and fun. That's why we go back to that first verse that we talked about in 1 Peter. As God's obedient children, never again shape your lives by the desires that you had followed when you didn't know better. Instead, shape your lives to become like the Holy One who called you. For Scripture says, you are to be holy because I am holy. As God's kids, if we can recognize how we lost that joy, we can now shape our lives to become more holy. How can we live it out? The other day, Edie and I were leaving Burger King, and there was a play area. She's like, Mom, hold my stuff. And I'm like, yes, this is great. And she went into the play area. She ended up making friends. They were playing hide and seek. It was beautiful. It was joyous. It was silly. It was welcoming. And I think Jesus understands that kind of energy, because after Jesus was teaching in the Bible, one of the times, people started bringing up their kids to Jesus, asking them to pray for them. And I can imagine, if you looked at any children, it is not a solemn line of everyone just standing there perfectly. No, it was crowded and it was silly. And I'm sure kids were tugging on Jesus' robe saying, Jesus, why do you wear your beard like that? Jesus, he just loved to let those kids in. And the apostles are like, oh my gosh, Jesus, we need to stick to schedule. He doesn't have time, kids, to be bothered. And Jesus said this, he said, let the little children come to me. Do not get in their way, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to children like these. Jesus was saying, why are we pushing aside this wonder, this joy and ease? This is what the kingdom of heaven represents. Just as our Father prayer says, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Because of his sacrifice, we get to take a taste of what it's like to live in heaven with him, to experience his holiness in the now. It is really difficult to turn off our schedules and those thoughts like the apostles, but what if? Little doses of fun are just what the doctor ordered, just 30 seconds to provide us with a release of dopamine. That is a neurochemical response that can rebuild over and over to reinforce that act of fun and joy and ultimately making you want to repeat it. Groucho Marx said, if you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. I think we can overcomplicate fun, right? Or try to force it when we just want to make it a part of our life. But it's just natural, whatever happens. One of my favorite memories this summer, before I broke my foot, our daughter and her boyfriend, they went out onto the golf course, which is behind our house, and I'm sure they wanted to have a romantic walk alone. But I turned to Reed after they left, and I said, what about we get out our Halloween masks, okay? And we just run after them, okay? It was fun. I almost peed my pants. I was laughing so much. And it's okay to be weird, right? It is so much more fun that way. And secondly, we get to live in anticipation. You have something, when you look forward to something, there's that excitement that's bubbling up. Hope builds in that. And what if you said, hey, God, I am going to live in anticipation of the ways that you are going to bring fun today. And my hope for you is that we be people who follow Jesus that are of whimsy, people who delight in opportunity, that we spur on imagination and are filled with wonder, just as we try to embody Jesus in all we do. Maybe your next step is finding others. If you didn't have examples in your life of fun, or maybe you just need the courage to just dip one of those toes in, ask yourself, who is that person that comes to mind for you? Not reckless, right? But with a sense of freedom and enthusiasm of finding joy often. The word enthusiasm comes from the Greek word ethnos, which means God within. We need to find people in our life who can spark that enthusiasm of living in God's character and his holiness. And I think what happens is when we open that door to silliness and fun, that joy, it just spills over into the lives of others that we share. It becomes multiplied in so many bigger ways than we could even imagine. Nelson Mandela said, as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. And for those of us that struggle with permission or the embarrassment of perfection, it's hard to live like that. But guess what? We are the aroma of Christ. People pick up on that scent, the difference that breaks down these misunderstandings over time of what holiness actually is. So your presence is allowing permission for others to try for the first time. And the second is that we can be an example. My first job out of college at a Christian university was an events director at the Brookfield Zoo. And so I worked with a bunch of 20-year-olds, and I was touted, I didn't say it, but they said I was a Bible thumper who was uptight and definitely not fun. Did I separate myself from them? No, of course not. I made relationships with them. I hung outside with them out of work, and I had fun with them all the while, not losing focus on who God called me to be. And in those relationships that were natural, then that conversation started and questions were asked. Our joy can point others to Jesus' holiness in the most simple ways. You may have heard recently that the astronaut Jim Lovell, he passed away at the age of 97 just 2 weeks ago. And prior to his harrowing Apollo 13 mission, 17 years earlier in 1953, Jim was driving a carrier, he was a carrier pilot, and he was getting back to the carrier ship USS Shangri-La. And darkness was coming, and all of a sudden, as darkness enveloped him, his instruments and his communications went dead. And now he's just flying blind, and he's wondering, how am I going to get back to this ship? How am I even going to find where it is? As his plane lowered closer to the water, what he noticed was this green bioluminescence coming out from under the sea. And what had happened is that carrier, that giant propeller that was pushing it along, it pulled up all this bioluminescence, and so he had a direct line of how to get back to the carrier. Isn't that amazing? And I think sometimes the things that we are to others, people are just searching for this smallest speck of light for direction. There are so many of us that just feel like we're walking alone. We feel like we're at a loss in the darkness and it's just ready to swallow us whole. But God, He propels us in our joy and our fun so that we stir up this kind of light when it seems too dark and too deep. I see our joy as one small act of rebellion at a time, a tool to fight for someone else's joy, to just hold on for a little longer. Fun and silliness, they don't have to be childish. It can be a lifeline for those who can't see what's in front of them. So how do we live out this truth? That holiness means living in God's character through joy and fun. If you're feeling like, oh gosh, like this is another thing that I have to add to my checklist, I understand that. But I'd love for you to think of this as an opportunity to find ways that you can draw closer to God and live out His holiness. So just start with, like, how did I lose my fun? If you're wondering, like, is this you? Like, have you ever heard people say, like, oh, don't ask her. Or dad, he's a little too tired. Oh, mom, she's busy. Okay. Grandma, grandpa, those kind of notions come about. That's probably a clue right there. God gives you the opportunity every day to break the status quo. So I want you to remove language or thoughts thinking like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work out. Just try it. And also, it's fun to be with people. If you're worried about that, like, oh, am I going to look weird? There's safety in numbers, okay? You can come run on the golf course anytime with me, all right? Second is, how can we live this out? Think of this as a life strategy that needs to be included. It's in small ways. I go to an aqua class, and most of my friends there are above the age of 68. And we have the adult pool early in the morning, and there is a water slide. And I looked at it the other day, and I'm like, I'm going to go down that water slide today. And they all cheered. They thought it was great. So I think you just have to find, what are these little opportunities that took 2 minutes, not even. Find fun in your clothes, in your food. Put a smiley face on those pancakes. Okay, that's fun. Give your different name for your coffee order. One time we did it as all the Golden Girls, and it was great. Add googly eyes to your office supply room, or maybe just put it on a banana at the store and you can just walk away. That's fun. You can do crazy hobbies. Things that are fun to you may not be fun for somebody else, but if you want to learn how to make a balloon animal, do it. No one says you have to be amazing at it. You get to choose. So how can I share joy with the world? Joy multiplies when you share it and you give permission to others to do the same. You are smart, though. You know when it's time to discern when it is appropriate. Okay? If somebody's walking through something hard, you're not going to start, let me tell you a joke. You know. Your fun for life could be the tiniest glimmer that someone needs for their own breakthrough. Fun is a part of holiness as we walk with God and we find that rhythm that draws us into His presence. There's a verse in Ecclesiastes that talks about how there is a time to weep, there's a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. It doesn't say, hold on, you need to completely mourn and weep and heal, and then and only then can you laugh and be silly. Of course not. Life happens in waves, and sometimes simultaneously we are in deep grief. And then suddenly we're reminded of a memory that brings us into a wave of laughter. Not to forget it, not to numb out, but to allow His holiness to wash over us. All kinds of emotions and fun can coexist. Sure, it feels like a little bit of rewiring has to take place, but it is possible because God says, be holy because I am holy. Break free of this misunderstanding that holiness equals strict rules and no fun. He says, be holy because I am holy. Don't give up on yourself yet. There's still time because God, He did not give up on you, and you get to live out this holiness through the joy He offers each one of us every single day. Hey, I hope you had fun and enjoyed this message. And if you are interested in seeing the live video, I will link it in today's show notes. And I just have one reflection question for you today. What is something fun you can do right now? I mean, you can go crazy, but it can also be really small too. Enjoy it. Just as a reminder, I know you're meeting people this fall, or maybe you have different parent meetings or work meetings that you're like, I have to meet all these new people. Guess what? I have a way to help you out on that. I would love for you to get my 10 basic tips to enhance your conversations and really listen well. All I need you to do is just go ahead and take my listener survey. It is literally 2 minutes or less. And I'd be happy to send that over to your inbox. To connect with me, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. That is going to be it for today. I appreciate you spending time with me. Remember, you can be whole, free, and joyful because of Christ. We'll see you next time on the Parable Podcast.